Hey guys, we're here in my bathroom and we're going to deal with this blank wall. My plan is to build a wood and rope shelf and we'll see how it goes. I loved this one from Restoration Hardware, but didn't love the $359 price tag. Mine is going to be a simple 10-step build with a cost of less than $65. The supplies you'll need are rope, lumber, 2 hooks, screws to attach them, and whatever stain and finish you'd like to use. The only tool you truly need is a drill with a 1-inch spade bit. But a circular saw, square, sander, level, stud finder, and hammer should definitely make this project easier. Oh, and don't forget something to cut the rope. Step 1, measure and design. The wall area that I was dealing with measured 51 inches wide by 59 inches tall. Based on where the studs were located, I decided to make my shelves 32 inches wide with 13 inches between each shelf. Step 2, beat up the board. Well, that was therapeutic. Step 3, measure and cut. Now, if you want to skip this step, you can have the nice folks at your lumberyard cut your boards for you. But if you're like me,
they see me rolling, they hating, patrolling and trying to catch me riding dirty.
There are only 3 cuts that need to be made. For the first one, I measured 32 inches with my tape measure and marked it with my speed square. I also used the speed square as a guide for my circular saw. For the last 2 cuts, I used the first board as a template to save time on measuring. Step 4, measure and drill. On each corner of all 3 boards, I measured 2 inches from the end and 1.5 inches from each side. I used a 1-inch spade bit to drill the holes. Since I wanted it to look rustic, I didn't care too much about the tear out underneath the board. However, if you want yours to look nice and tidy, you can either clamp a piece of scrap wood to the back of your board or drill partway through until the tip of the bit protrudes, then flip it over and drill from the other side. Step 5, sand those puppies. I started with 80 grit sandpaper. I really focused on rounding the edges and corners to make this new board look worn. I then moved on to 120 grit for a finer finish. If this had been a heavily used piece like a table, I would have started with a belt sander. But since I knew it would just sit on the wall and look pretty, I wasn't too worried about it. Step 6, stain and finish. Step 7, hang your hooks. Okay guys, this is where the stud finder comes in. Unfortunately, mine isn't working today. However, I happen to be excellent at finding studs. Have you seen my husband? In order to hang the hooks, I located the studs by measuring, they should be 16 inches apart, and knocking on the wall. Then I measured down 7 inches from the top trim. I used the hooks to mark where I would drill my pilot holes, drilled them, then attached the hooks with their screws. When planning this project, I decided not to center it on the wall so that I could put the hooks directly into the studs. With the way the tub is oriented, I knew no one would notice. If you don't have this luxury, you can simply cut an additional board the length of the shelves, drill it to the studs, then attach your hooks wherever you please on that piece of lumber. Anchors were another option I considered briefly, however, I just didn't trust them with this project. Step 8. Cut the rope and let's hang this sucker up. I put both ends of the rope together and ran it through my hands to find the center, then cut the rope in half. I then took one of the halves, ran it through my hands to find the center point, and tied a knot. I spent a little extra time pulling it tight and making sure that it laid nicely. Then I did the same thing to the other half. I hung each loop on each hook and threaded the rope through the top shelf. This was simply for me to visualize exactly where I wanted the top shelf to hang. I measured from the bottom of the top knot to the bottom of the shelf to determine where I would place the knots under the shelf. 15 inches was the magic number. Once I'd measured, I pulled the ropes and shelf down to the floor to assemble. My approach for the top shelf was to thread the rope through the holes in the board, then tie a knot in each strand 15 inches from the bottom of the top knot. For the second and third shelves, I pulled the knot flush and measured 15 inches from the bottom of the shelf above. This is where I tied my next knot. I then repeated this process until all boards and ropes were threaded and secured. I tried a few things before landing on this method, but ultimately I knew that I would be making leveling adjustments once it was hung, so the actual assembly process didn't have to be super precise. I looped the ropes onto the hooks once again and started working to get this thing leveled. Although this part was slightly tedious, it wasn't difficult. Minor adjustments to the knots were all that it took. I will add that this process was pretty tough on my wall paint. Touch-up was necessary. It might have been possible to hang a sheet on the hooks between the shelf and the wall to protect it, but by the time I had that idea, the damage was done. Once all 3 shelves were leveled, I tied knots about 6 inches down from the bottom of the bottom knots and cut off the excess rope. Step 9. Decorate. Step 10, relax. You earned it.